Mexico encouraged Americans to settle Texas. The immigrants were given land that Mexicans had not claimed. These Americans became Mexican citizens and were supposed to learn Spanish and convert to Catholicism. They never really became Mexican, however. They kept their language and culturally had more in common with the people of the US than with Mexico. Many settlers were afraid that the Mexicans would take their slaves away, so slave owners wanted independence from Mexico. The Constitution of 1824 allowed the Texans freedom to rule themselves. The Santa Anna replaced this constitution with another that gave the federal government more control, and many Texans were outraged. Texans found it hard to resolve their differences with the central Mexican government, as new governments often reversed decisions made by previous ones. For Texan farmers, it was easier to send goods downstream to the coast, ship them to a nearby US city, and sell them there. So the Texans had strong economic ties with the United States. Many Americans believed that Texas, as well as other parts of Mexico, should belong to the United States. Political leaders such as Andrew Jackson secretly encouraged Texas settlers to rebel. Stephen F. Austin was one of the many Americans who immigrated to Texas planning on being a good citizen of Mexico. After years of arguments with the Mexican bureaucracy, he changed sides and supported independence. He spent a year in a Mexican prison for supporting Texas statehood. In 1835, the first shots of the Texas Revolution were fired in the town of Gonzales. After the Texans captured San Antonio, General Santa Anna marched north with a giant army. They overran the defenders at a battle of the Alamo in 1836. The same year, Texas formally declared independence. Although Mexico tried several times in the next few years to reclaim Texas, the Republic of Texas joined the United States in 1845. On April 25, 1846, Mexican cavalry attacked a group of U.S. soldiers in the disputed zone under the command of General Zachary Taylor, killing about a dozen. Taylor called in reinforcements and, with the help of superior rifles and artillery, was able to defeat the Mexican at the Battle of Palo Alto and the Battle of Resaca de la Palma. On May 13, Congress declared war. Despite opposition from some northern lawmakers, no official declaration of war ever came from Mexico. At that time, only about 75,000 Mexican citizens lived north of the Rio Grande. As a result, U.S. forces led by Stephen Watts Kearny and Robert Field Stockton were able to conquer those lands with minimal resistance. Taylor likewise had little trouble advancing, and he captured the city of Monterrey in September. With the losses adding up, Mexico turned to General Antonio López de Santa Anna, who had been living in exile in Cuba. Santa Anna convinced Polk that, if allowed to return to Mexico, he would end the war on terms favorable to the United States. When Santa Anna arrived, he betrayed Polk by taking control of the Mexican army and leading it into battle. At the Battle of Buena Vista in February 1847, Santa Anna suffered heavy casualties and was forced to withdraw. Despite the loss, he assumed the Mexican presidency the following month. Meanwhile, U.S. troops led by General Winfield Scott landed in Veracruz and took over the city. After that, they began marching towards Mexico City. The Mexicans resisted at the Battle of Cerro Gordo, but were defeated each time. In September 1847, Scott successfully laid siege to Mexico City's Chapultepec Castle. During that battle, a group of military school cadets called Niños Héroes committed suicide rather than surrender. Guerrilla attacks against U.S. supply lines continued, but for all intents and purposes the war had ended. Santa Anna resigned, and the United States waited for a new government capable of negotiations to form. Finally, on February 2, 1848, the Treaty of Guadalupe Hidalgo was signed, establishing the Rio Grande as the U.S.-Mexican border. Under the treaty, Mexico also recognized the U.S. annexation of Texas and agreed to sell California and the rest of its territory north of the Rio Grande for $50 million plus the assumption of certain damage claims. On the surface, the war's outcome seemed like a benefit for the United States, but the possession of so much territory with the issue of slavery unresolved lit the fuse and eventually set off the Civil War in 1861.